Emeka,
What happened?
the baby wants roasted corn
At 2 a.m.,
and coconut.
our child has chosen 2 a.m. too. Are you eating toothpaste?
I'm just tasting it. The baby wants mint.
Mint? From toothpaste?
Yes?
I am beginning to fear this baby.
The baby loves it!
This child has not even been born, and I am already controlling the weather.
Trust me, it did not start with a man standing on his own roof like a confused weather god. It started, as these things always do, with two words: I'm pregnant. Chidinma and Emeka had been married for 2 years when the second line appeared on the test in that small bathroom. Chidinma sat on the edge of the bathtub, holding the little white stick with both hands like it was made of glass. And when Emeka walked in and saw her face, he knew before she even said a word. "Emeka," she whispered, "we're going to be parents." Emeka did not say anything for almost 10 full seconds. Then he let out a shout so loud that the neighbor's dog started barking, picked his wife up off the bathroom floor, and spun her around the small apartment twice before remembering that spinning a pregnant woman was probably not medically recommended. Put me down, you will shake the baby out," Chidinma laughed, smacking his shoulder. That night, Emeka knelt beside the bed, placed his palm flat on Chidinma's stomach, which had not even started showing yet, and made a promise. "From today, you are the queen of this house," he said. "Whatever you want, whatever you need, I will make sure this pregnancy is the smoothest, most comfortable 9 months any woman has ever had." Chidinma smiled at him in the dark. "You mean that?" "On my life." If only Emeka knew what those words would cost him. Because somewhere between that promise and the second trimester, Chidinma discovered a phrase with more power than any spell in any Nollywood village. A phrase that could end an argument before it started. A phrase that could turn a lazy afternoon into a sacred, untouchable ritual. The baby wants it. At first, it was innocent enough. "Emeka, I'm too tired to cook today. The baby is stressing me." Fine, Emeka cooked. "Emeka, can you wash this plate? My back is aching because of the baby." Fine, Emeka washed. He didn't mind. He had made a promise, and Emeka was not a man who broke promises. Besides, he told himself, pregnancy really was tiring. He had watched enough of his sister's pregnancies to know that a growing human being inside your body was not a small thing. But somewhere in month 4, Emeka started noticing a pattern. Chidinma was tired when it was time to cook, but somehow had enough energy to gist on the phone with her friend in Kiru for 2 hours straight. Chidinma's back ached when it came to sweeping, but she could stand comfortably in the mirror for 45 minutes trying on outfits that no longer fit her changing body. By month 5, Emeka was doing all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the laundry, and most of the grocery shopping, while Chidinma lay across the couch with one hand resting on her belly like a queen surveying her kingdom from a throne. Whenever he tried, gently, to ask her to help with even one small thing, she would touch her stomach, sigh dramatically, and say the words that ended every conversation. "Emeka, the baby needs me to rest." And what could Emeka say to that? Argue with an unborn child? He would lose that argument every single time because the unborn child could not defend itself, which meant Chidinma got to defend it however she liked. Emeka started keeping his complaints to himself. He told himself it was temporary. 9 months. He could survive 9 months. He had no idea that the real chaos hadn't even started yet. If Chidinma's laziness was a small fire, her mother, Mama Ugu, was the fuel that turned it into a bush burning. Mama Ugu lived 2 streets away, and once she heard the news of her daughter's pregnancy, she suddenly developed the habit of checking in, which in practice meant showing up at least 3 times a week, uninvited, usually right around mealtimes, with strong opinions about everything. The first time she visited after the pregnancy news, she walked straight past Emeka without greeting him properly, went to sit beside Chidinma, holding her daughter's hands, and said loudly enough for Emeka to hear from the kitchen, "My daughter, in my time, when a woman was pregnant, her husband did not let her touch water, not even one plate. Is Emeka treating you well?" Chidinma said, "He's trying, Mama," glancing toward the kitchen with a small guilty smile. "Trying is not enough," Mama Ugu declared. "A pregnant woman should be pampered like an egg, fragile, precious. If Emeka is not carrying you to the toilet himself, he's not doing enough." Emeka, standing in the kitchen doorway holding a wooden spoon, opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. There was no winning an argument with Mama Ugu. He had learnt that lesson at his own introduction ceremony, when she had spent 40 minutes listing all the reasons her daughter deserved a real man, not just any man. From that day, Mama Ugu became a permanent character in the household drama. She would call Chidinma every morning to ask what Emeka had cooked for her. She would send voice notes reminding her daughter that a man who truly loves his wife does not let her lift a broom while carrying his child. And whenever Emeka tried, even mildly, to push back on one of Chidinma's more outrageous requests, Mama Ugu somehow found out within hours and called to advise him. One Sunday afternoon, Mama Ugu arrived at the house not alone but with two of her church friends in tow. Auntie Beatrice, who owned a boutique in the market, and Deaconess Rose, who apparently just wanted to see how the pregnancy was going, but really wanted a front row seat to inspect Emeka's performance as a husband. They sat in the sitting room like a panel of judges at a competition Emeka had never agreed to enter. Deaconess Rose examined the state of the curtains. Auntie Beatrice asked loudly whether Emeka had started buying baby items yet, because some men wait until the very last week and by then it is too late. Mama Ugu, seated proudly in the middle, like the chairwoman of the whole affair, narrated Emeka's every recent action, the suya run, the toothpaste, even the burnt rice, not as complaints, but as a kind of scoreboard. And when she wanted rain, Mama Ugu said, gesturing with her hand for full dramatic effect, this man climbed onto the roof with a hose. The three women burst into laughter, clapping and shaking their heads, while Emeka stood by the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of chin-chin he had prepared for the visitors, smiling the tight, practiced smile of a man being discussed like he wasn't in the room. "You people should be praising him, not laughing at him," Chidinma said weakly from the couch, though even she was struggling not to smile. "We are praising him," Auntie Beatrice insisted. "This is praise. A man who will climb a roof for his wife is a rare man these days." Emeka set the tray down, excused himself quietly, and walked to the bedroom, where he opened his notebook and added a new line. Item: became entertainment for Mama's entire church cell group. He closed the notebook, sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of silent suffering before returning to serve more chin-chin, because in this house, the show apparently had to go on. Mama Ugu also called Emeka directly, more often than he would have liked. "Emeka, my in-law," she would say on the phone, her voice sweet as sugar cane and just as sticky. "You know pregnancy is not small thing. A man who complains about small requests during pregnancy is a man who does not deserve the child that will come out of it." Emeka would grit his teeth and say, "Yes, Mama, I understand, Mama." Then he would hang up, look at the ceiling and whisper, "God, why?" With Mama Ugu actively coaching her from the sidelines, Chidila's confidence in "the baby wants it" grew from a request into a full constitution, unshakable, unquestionable, and according to her mother, sacred law. The very first midnight demand, the one that started it all, came at 2:14 a.m., roughly a week after Mama Ugu's eggshell speech. Emeka was fast asleep, snoring peacefully, when he felt violent shaking against his shoulder. "Emeka!" He jolted upright, heart hammering, certain something was seriously wrong. "What happened?" Chidinma sat up beside him, one hand pressed to her stomach, her face set with an expression of grave seriousness. "I want something." Emeka blinked at her in the darkness, waiting for his brain to catch up. "What?" I want roasted corn. Slowly, Emeka turned to look at the glowing bedside clock. 2:14 a.m. He turned back to his wife, certain he had misheard. At 2 a.m.? Yes. Where am I supposed to find roasted corn at this time, Chidinma? The roadside sellers packed up hours ago. Chidinma rubbed her belly gently, entirely unbothered by the impossibility of the request. I don't know. Your child wants it. Emeka stared at her, searching her face for even a hint that this was a joke. There was none. Our child has chosen 2 a.m. to eat roasted corn and coconut, Chidinma added confidently. Emeka's mouth fell open. Roasted corn and coconut at 2 a.m. Where in Lagos am I supposed to find someone selling coconut in the middle of the night? Chidinma nodded, entirely confident, as though she had not just asked her husband to perform a minor miracle. Very important. Emeka sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, rubbing his face with both hands, before finally getting up and pulling on his clothes. He drove nearly 40 minutes across town before finding an all-night patrol station attendant who, for a generous tip, knew a woman who sold roasted corn from a wheelbarrow near the motor park at odd hours for exactly this kind of emergency. He never did find coconut and spent the drive home rehearsing an apology for its absence, only for Chidinma to take one bite of the corn, declare it a little too dry, and drift back to sleep without a single word about the missing coconut. Emeka stood in the dark kitchen holding a half-eaten cob of corn and had his very first quiet realization of the pregnancy. This is going to be a long 9 months. He had no idea that night just how right he was, or how quickly roasted corn would become the least of his problems. The demands only grew from there. A few nights later, Emeka was deep asleep, dreaming about absolutely nothing important, when he felt a hand shaking his shoulder again. Emeka, wake up. He opened one eye. Chidinma, is everything okay? Is it the baby? The baby wants suya. Emeka blinked at her in the darkness, waiting for the punchline. There was no punchline. Suya? He repeated slowly. In 1:30 in the morning, again? The baby is craving it, Emeka, badly. I can feel it. The suya man closes his stand at 9 p.m, Chidinma. There is no suya in this entire local government area right now. Chidinma's face immediately began to crumple and her voice rose an octave. So you are saying your own child should suffer? Is that what you are saying? That your first son should go without because his father couldn't be bothered to try? I didn't say. My mother warned me about men like this, Chidinma sniffed, turning her face away dramatically. She said some men promise heaven during courtship and disappear the moment real responsibility comes. That last line did it. Emeka pictured Mama Ugo's face, imagined the phone call that would follow if word got back to her that he had refused a pregnant woman's craving, and got out of bed with the enthusiasm of a soldier reporting for a war he did not sign up for. He drove around for 45 minutes in the middle of the night, eventually bribing a night shift buka attendant into grilling him a small portion of suspicious-looking beef that only vaguely resembled suya, and returned home like a conquering hero. Chidinma took one bite, made a face, and said, "This doesn't even taste right," before falling promptly back to sleep. Emeka stood in the dark kitchen at 2:45 a.m., holding a half-eaten plate of fake suya, and shook his head slowly. 2 nights, 2 impossible cravings. He was starting to sense a pattern, and it worried him. The midnight calls became a weekly event, then a twice-weekly event. Pounded yam at 2 a.m., ice cream in the middle of a thunderstorm, once, memorably, a specific type of orange that Chidinma insisted only existed at one particular fruit seller across town. A fruit seller who, it turned out, had traveled to the village for a burial and would not be back for 2 weeks. Emeka started sleeping with one eye open, the way soldiers do in enemy territory. Every household drama has a moment the audience does not come seeing. And for Emeka, That moment arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening when he walked into the bathroom and found his wife standing at the sink with a tube of toothpaste in her hand, squeezing a generous amount directly onto her tongue like it was ice cream. Emeka stood frozen in the doorway. "Chidinma, what are you doing?" Chidinma said, savoring it like a fine wine. "It's so minty." "You are eating toothpaste?" "I'm not eating it. I'm just tasting it." "That tube is now half empty, Chidinma." "The baby likes the taste," she said defensively, wiping a small green smear from the corner of her mouth. "Is that my fault? Should I deny him because you are being dramatic about toothpaste?" Emeka rubbed his temples slowly. The baby cannot taste toothpaste. The baby is floating in water inside your stomach. The baby does not know what mint is. How would you know? Have you ever been pregnant? There was truly no answer to that question that would not end in an argument. So, Emeka simply turned around, walked to the sitting room, and sat down heavily on the couch, staring at the wall like a man questioning every decision that had led him to this exact moment in his life. He did not sleep well that night. He kept picturing a toothpaste-flavored baby. Before we continue, if this story is already making you laugh, or if you've survived a Wahala pregnancy story of your own in your family, do us a favor, tap that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We drop stories like this regularly, and trust me, what happens with the burnt jollof rice, the mattress, and that unforgettable rain scene is still ahead of us. You do not want to miss it. Now, back to Emeka and his very demanding household. By month 6, Chidinma had not stepped into the kitchen once in almost 4 weeks. So when she announced out of nowhere that she wanted to cook dinner herself, Emeka nearly dropped the remote control in shock. "You want to cook?" Emeka asked, eyes wide, already imagining a hot plate of jollof rice or maybe her famous egusi soup that he hadn't tasted since the wedding reception. "Yes," Chidinma said, tying her wrapper around her waist with unusual determination. "I've been craving to cook something myself." Emeka practically floated to the sitting room, so pleased with himself that he even called his younger brother to boast. "My wife is cooking tonight too. First time in a month. God has finally answered my prayers." 45 minutes later, an unmistakable smell drifted from the kitchen, the sharp, bitter smell of something burning badly. Emeka rushed in to find black smoke calling from a pot and Chidinma standing calmly beside the stove, completely unbothered, stirring the charred remains of what used to be jollof rice. "Emeka, the food is burning," she said. "I know." Emeka stared at her. "You know? The baby wanted it this way." There was a long silence in the kitchen. Emeka looked at the pot, he looked at his wife, he looked back at the pot. "The baby," he said slowly, "wanted burnt rice." "Craving," Chidinma corrected, scooping a generous portion onto a plate and presenting it to him with the pride of a 5-star chef unveiling a signature dish. "Enjoy." Emeka took one bite out of sheer disbelief and immediately regretted every choice that had led him into that kitchen. The rice was not just burnt, it was aggressively, violently burnt, tasting like charcoal seasoned with betrayal. He forced it down out of respect for his wife's feelings, while chasing each spoonful with a large gulp of water, while Chidinma sat across from him, happily eating her own portion as though it were the finest meal in Lagos. "Isn't it good?" she asked, beaming. "It's something," Emeka managed, eyes watering, although he wasn't sure if it was from the smoke or from grief. From that night forward, Emeka quietly and permanently reclaimed full control of the kitchen. No amount of "the baby wants it" would ever convince him to eat Chidinma's cooking again during this pregnancy. Emeka had always snored a little. Chidinma had known this since before they married. It had never once been a problem. Until now. "Emeka," a hand shook him awake at 3 a.m. "You are snoring. The baby can't sleep." Emeka, half-conscious, mumbled, "I'm asleep, Chidinma. I don't control what happens when I'm asleep." "Well, figure it out." She flipped over dramatically. "The baby is complaining." For the next several nights, Emeka tried everything humanly possible to stop the involuntary noise coming out of his own nose. He slept on his side. He slept propped up on 3 pillows like a man recovering from surgery. He tried holding his own nose closed, which only made him wake up gasping for air. He even attempted sleeping upright in a chair, which resulted in a stiff neck that lasted 3 days. Nothing worked. A man cannot fully control his own snoring simply by wishing it away, no matter how many pillows are involved. Eventually, Chidinma reached her limit. You need to sleep in the guest room. The baby needs peace. Emeka spent the next 2 weeks exiled to the guest room, sleeping on a mattress that clearly was not designed for actual human comfort and was, he suspected, without a single ounce of guilt in their king-sized bed. The guest room mattress had a spring that poked directly into his lower back no matter which way he turned, and by the 4th night, he had started referring to it in his head as the torture device. He would lie awake staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the faint, peaceful silence coming from the main bedroom, and wonder how a man could be simultaneously exhausted and wide awake at the same time. He briefly considered moving a proper mattress into the guest room himself just to make his exile more bearable, but decided against it. Some part of him suspected that improving his situation too visibly would only invite a new complaint. Best, he decided, to suffer quietly and wait it out. One night, out of sheer exhaustion, Emeka tried a different strategy. He borrowed a device his colleagues swore by, a small strip that stuck across the bridge of the nose and was supposed to keep the airways open. He wore it to bed, feeling ridiculous, like a boxer preparing for a fight he never signed up for. It worked marginally for about 2 hours before Chidinma shook him awake anyway. You are still snoring. Emeka, I have a strip on my nose. I did everything short of surgery. Well, the strip isn't working. Maybe you need two. Emeka lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, seriously considering whether 2 nose strips stacked on top of each other would actually make a difference, or whether he had simply lost the ability to think rationally after months of sleep deprivation. He decided eventually that it didn't matter either way. He was moving to the guest room regardless. The final insult came one morning when he dragged himself out of the guest room, back aching, eyes heavy, only to find Chidinma stretching happily in the kitchen doorway, fully rested, humming a tune. You slept well? Emeka asked, unable to hide the bitterness in his voice. Wonderfully, Chidinma said. Best sleep I've had in weeks. Emeka simply nodded, walked past her, and started a mental list. A very important list, one he had started keeping secretly in a small notebook he now carried with him almost everywhere. He would need it later. Once the snoring war ended, the demands did not slow down. They multiplied, becoming stranger and more specific by the week. The baby suddenly hated Emeka's haircut, so Chidinma insisted he grow it out, then insisted he cut it low again 2 weeks later. The baby wanted new curtains, not just any curtains, but a very particular shade of blue that took Emeka 3 different markets and 1 entire Saturday to locate. The baby, according to Chidinma, hated the position of the television and needed it moved to the opposite wall, a task that involved Emeka drilling new holes, buying a new wall mount, and nearly electrocuting himself in the process. The baby apparently also hated the neighbor's generator, though there was very little Emeka could do about that particular complaint, short of moving house entirely. And on one particularly memorable evening, Chidinma announced that the baby wanted Emeka to carry her from the sitting room to the bedroom, a distance of roughly 15 steps, because walking apparently was suddenly too stressful for both mother and child. Every single time Emeka hesitated, even for a second, even just to catch his breath, Chidinma delivered the same 4 words, now sharpened into a weapon. Don't argue with the baby. And every single time, somehow, Mama Ugo found out within the hour and called to remind Emeka that a real man does not argue with his unborn child. Emeka began to suspect his wife and mother-in-law had a direct communication line specifically dedicated to reporting his every hesitation. He started privately, giving each demand a nickname just to survive them with his sanity intact. The mattress incident became Operation Spinal Health. The curtain saga became The Blue Wars. The television relocation became simply the Great Migration. He never said these names out loud, not once, not even under his breath where Chidinma might catch a syllable of it. But inside his own head, narrating his own suffering like a sport commentator was the only thing keeping him from losing his mind entirely. There was also, he noticed, a strange rhythm to it all. The demands never came when things were calm. They arrived the moment Emeka allowed himself to relax, the second he closed his eyes for an afternoon nap, the second he genuinely believed, even for 5 minutes, that the house had reached a state of peace. It was as though Chidinma's belly had its own internal breather for his comfort and existed purely to disrupt it. You know, he told his younger brother Chuka over the phone one evening, keeping his voice low so Chidinma wouldn't hear from the next room. I used to think I was a patient man. I used to think nothing could break me. And now, Chuka asked, clearly enjoying this far too much. Now I understand why some men run mad during their wife's pregnancy. It's not madness, it's survival mechanism. Chuka laughed so hard down the phone that Emeka had to hold the receiver away from his ear. The rain. Which brings us back to where we started. It was a Saturday afternoon, hot enough to fry an egg on the compound floor, when Emeka was outside washing his car, shirt soaked with sweat, minding his own business, when Chidinma stepped out onto the veranda, fanning herself dramatically with a folded newspaper. Emeka, I'm so hot. The living room has air conditioning, Chidinma. You were literally just sitting under it. I don't want air conditioning, she said, wrinkling her nose. It's not natural. I want real cooling, natural cooling. Emeka wiped his hands on a rag and looked at her confused. What kind of natural cooling? Rain, Chidinma said, simply, as though it was the most obvious answer in the world. Emeka looked up. The sky above them was a flawless, cloudless blue, the kind of sky that made it very clear rain was not happening today, tomorrow, or possibly this entire week. Chidinma, there is not a single cloud up there. And that was when Chidinma's face began its familiar transformation. Eyes widening slightly, lower lip trembling just enough, voice cracking right on cue. So you don't care, she said softly. You are standing there in front of your pregnant wife, telling her she can't have one small thing? My own mother said men change once the wedding is over, and I defended you, Emeka. I defended you to her. Emeka closed his eyes and took a long, slow breath, the kind of breath a man takes when he's trying very hard not to say something he will regret. He thought about the notebook, he thought about the mattress, he thought about the toothpaste. And then somehow, an idea arrived, ridiculous, but an idea nonetheless. He walked to the side of the house, grabbed the long garden hose, and without another word, climbed the small ladder propped against the wall and up onto the flat section of the roof. Emeka, what are you doing up there? Chidinma called, shielding her eyes from the sun. Emeka did not answer. He simply turned the tap, aimed the hose upward at an angle, and let the water fly into the air in a wide glittering arc that came down over the compound like a sudden localized shower. For a moment there was silence. Then Chidinma let out a delighted shriek, ran directly into the falling water, arms outstretched, spinning in slow circles as the spray sucked through her clothes, laughing like a child who had just been given the best gift of her life. It's raining! Emeka, you made it rain! Emeka stood on the roof with hose in hand, sweat dripping down his own face from the effort and the heat, watching his wife dance in the artificial rainstorm he had personally created with a garden hose and pure desperation. And that, of course, was exactly the moment Mama Ogo chose to walk through the compound gate for one of her unannounced visits. Emeka! She shouted up at the roof, hands on her hips, voice carrying across the entire compound. Emeka, what is this nonsense? Why is my daughter standing outside in wet clothes while you play with water like a madman on a roof? Ma, she asked for rain, Emeka called down, too tired to explain further. Rain? From where? Come down here and explain yourself before you fall from that roof and leave my grandchild fatherless. Emeka climbed slowly, already composing in his head the newest entry for the notebook. Item: made artificial rain with garden hose because sky refused to cooperate. Mother-in-law arrived in time to witness it and somehow still found a way to blame me. For a while after the rain incident, things were almost peaceful. Almost. Then, on a quiet Thursday evening, 3 weeks before Chidinma's due date, she made one more request. One Emeka doesn't even like repeating, because on paper it sounds so small. But by that point, it was the request that broke the camel's back entirely. She wanted him to repaint the entire nursery, again, for the third time, because the baby, according to her, now preferred a slightly different shade of yellow than the one they had already painted twice. Emeka, standing in the doorway of a nursery he had personally repainted twice, already, holding a paint roller he had only just put down an hour earlier, felt something inside him finally give way. "No," he said. Chidinma blinked. "What?" "No, Chidinma. I'm not repainting that room a third time. The color is fine. The baby will not know the difference between two shades of yellow the moment he is born. He will not even be able to see clearly for weeks." "Are you seriously refusing your own child?" "I am refusing," Emeka said, his voice steady, "and a fourth trip to the paint store this month." Chidinma's eyes filled instantly, right on cue, and her voice cracked in that familiar way. "So this is who you really are? The moment it becomes inconvenient, you stop caring about me and this baby?" But this time, for the first time in 8 months, Emeka did not soften, did not apologize, did not immediately reach for his car keys. "Chidinma," he said quietly, "I need to show you something." He walked to the bedroom and returned holding the small worn notebook he had been secretly filling for the last 8 months. He opened it to the very first page where in his own handwriting was written a single title: "Things the Baby Has Demanded." At exactly that moment, the front door opened without a knock, and Mama Ugo walked in. Because of course she did, because Mama Ugo's timing was, and had always been, impeccably terrible. "What is going on here?" she asked, looking between her daughter's tearful face and Emeka's notebook. "Mama, perfect timing," Emeka said, and for the first time in 8 months, he did not lower his voice for her. "Please, sit down, both of you. I want to read something." He began to read. Midnight suya runs across town, twice a week for nearly 2 months, a tube and a half of toothpaste personally consumed, a pot of deliberately aggressively burnt jollof rice served with pride, a new mattress that cost more than his salary, curtains in a very specific, very hard-to-find shade of blue, a television moved, unmoved, and nearly moved a third time, 2 weeks of exile to the guest room over snoring he could not control, being carried across a 15-step distance because walking had suddenly become too stressful, a garden hose turned into a homemade rainstorm on a cloudless afternoon, and now a nursery painted twice, about to be painted a third time, over a difference in yellow that would not matter to a newborn who could barely see. By the time Emeka finished reading, Chidinma had gone very quiet, staring at her hands in her lap. Mama Ugo, for once in her life, said absolutely nothing at all. "Our son," Emeka said gently, closing the notebook, "has apparently made more demands in 8 months than most grown adults make in a year. And every single time I did it. I never once said no, not because I couldn't, but because I love you, and because I was scared of failing you during this pregnancy." Chidinma's eyes filled again, but this time it was different, slower, quieter. Not performance, something real breaking through underneath it. "I know," Chidinma said softly, her voice shaking. "I know what I've been doing, Emeka." "But why?" Emeka cut her off, the words tumbling out faster now, like she'd been holding them back for months. "Because I'm scared," Chidinma said. "This is my first pregnancy. My body doesn't feel like mine anymore. I don't recognize myself in the mirror some mornings. I'm scared of labor. I'm scared of being a bad mother. I'm scared that once this baby comes, nobody will care how I'm feeling anymore because everyone's attention will be on him instead." And then I realized the moment I said the baby wants it, you dropped everything for me. You looked at me like I mattered, and I got addicted to that feeling, Emeka. Not to toothpaste, not to suya, to you dropping everything just for me. So I kept asking, and I kept telling myself it was fine because it was for the baby. But it was never about the baby. It was about me needing to know you still saw me. The room went completely silent. Even Mama Ugo, who always had something to say, sat frozen in her chair. Emeka knelt down slowly in front of his wife, took both her hands in his, and said quietly, Chidinma, I do see you. I saw you the day you told me you are pregnant, and I see you now. But you don't need burnt rice or fake rainstorms to make me stay close to you. You just needed to tell me you are scared. I would have held you either way. Chidinma let out a small broken laugh through her tears. I know that now. I'm sorry, Emeka. I think somewhere along the line I stopped noticing the difference between what I needed and what I was demanding. And I, Emeka admitted, got so focused on counting the ridiculous requests in that notebook that I stopped asking you how you are actually feeling underneath all of it. I should have noticed sooner. I'm sorry too. Mama, go on characteristically quiet throughout this exchange, finally cleared her throat. When I was pregnant with Chidinma, she said slowly, I did the same thing to her father. Worse even. I never told anyone I was afraid. I made him carry the fear for me in the form of demands because it was easier than saying the word scared out loud. She paused, looking down at her hands. I did not mean to teach my daughter to do the same. I am sorry, Emeka. I made things hard for you these past months, encouraging her instead of helping her. It was without a question the first apology Emeka had ever received from his mother-in-law, and he was not entirely sure his ears had heard it correctly, but he accepted it with a small, grateful nod. That evening, the three of them sat together in the sitting room. No demands, no notebook, no dramatic tears, and simply talked, honestly, for the first time in 8 months. Mama Ogo for once did most of the listening instead of the talking. She told them, quietly, about her own pregnancy with Chidinma decades ago, how her own husband had traveled for work during most of it, how she had spent long nights alone with nobody to voice her fears to, and how by the time he returned she had learned to bury her feelings so deep that even she stopped recognizing them. I promised myself my daughter would never feel that alone. She twisted the edge of her wrapper in her fingers. But somewhere along the line, I confused never feeling alone with never having to ask for anything directly. I taught her to hide behind demands instead of teaching her to simply say the words, I am afraid. That was my mistake, not yours, Emeka. Emeka, surprising even himself, reached over and placed a gentle hand on his mother-in-law's shoulder and said quietly, Thank you for telling us that, Mama. Don't get used to it, Mama Ogo said quickly, wiping at her eyes and straightening her back. I am still your mother-in-law. I will still call to advise you, just perhaps a little less often. Chidinma laughed for the first time all evening, a real unguarded laugh, and reached for her husband's hand. The final 3 weeks of the pregnancy were remarkably the calmest of the entire 9 months. Chidinma still had cravings, but now she asked instead of demanded. And Emeka found himself happy to help because it no longer felt like a performance. It felt like partnership. Mama Ogo still visited often, but her comments softened. And once or twice, Emeka even caught her helping quietly in the kitchen instead of criticizing from the doorway. One evening, Chidinma sat beside Emeka on the couch, her feet propped up on his lap as he massaged them absent-mindedly while watching television. Emeka, she said quietly, I know I made you suffer these past months. You made me climb a roof, he said, not looking away from the screen, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward. You made me climb a roof, she agreed, laughing softly. But thank you for never actually leaving, for never once saying you'd had enough, even when you clearly had. Emeka set down the remote and looked at her properly. I promised you the smoothest 9 months any woman has ever had. I don't know if I kept that promise exactly the way I imagined, but I never once regretted making it. Even the toothpaste? Especially the toothpaste, Emeka said, shaking his head slowly. I still think about that tube sometimes. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover. Chidinma laughed properly this time, the sound filling the small sitting room, and for a moment, watching her laugh without a single dramatic hand on her belly, without a single manufactured tear, Emeka felt something settle quietly in his chest. Whatever came next, labor, sleepless nights, a newborn who would undoubtedly have opinions of his own, he knew at least that they would be facing it as a team, not as a queen and her exhausted roof-climbing errand boy. Emeka repainted the nursery one final time, not because the baby demanded it, but because Chidinma admitted, honestly this time, that the color genuinely didn't feel right to her, and he wanted to give her that. They spent evenings talking about names, about fears, about the kind of parents they hoped to be. For the first time since the second line appeared on that test, the house felt like it belonged to both of them again. We're almost at the finish line, and trust me, the ending of this one is worth staying for. If you've been enjoying the ride, the midnight suya runs, the burnt rice, Mama Ogo's perfectly terrible timing, and that unforgettable rain scene, subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next in this channel. We tell stories like this every week, and the endings always hit different. Labor started on a Tuesday night, 3 days before the due date. Emeka barely remembered the drive to the hospital, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, Chidinma gripping his arm through contractions. Mama Ogo somehow already there before them, having apparently sensed it the way mothers always seem to. After nearly 14 hours, a nurse finally stepped out and told Emeka he could come in. He walked into that hospital room and saw his wife, exhausted, glowing, holding a small wrapped bundle in her arms. "Emeka," Chidinma said softly, tears in her eyes, but different tears this time, the good kind. "Meet your son." Emeka took the baby into his arms for the first time, and something inside him just broke open. All the midnight errands, the burnt rice, the rain, the notebook, none of it mattered anymore. He looked down at the tiny face in his arms and felt an overwhelming wave of love so strong it nearly knocked the breath out of him. He thought absurdly of the notebook still sitting in the drawer at home and realized that every ridiculous item on that list, every suya run, every gallon of water sprayed pointlessly into a clear sky, had somehow led to this exact moment. If someone had told him 9 months ago that fake rain and burnt jollof rice were the price of admission for this feeling, he would have signed up twice. Mama Ogo stood quietly by the door, dabbing at her eyes with the edge of her headscarf, for once with nothing sharp to say. "He's perfect," Emeka whispered. And then, right on cue, as if summoned by the sound of his father's voice, the baby's small face scrunched up and he began to cry. Loud, sharp, insistent. Emeka froze. He looked down at the crying baby. Then slowly he turned and looked at Chidinma. "What does he want?" Chidinma laughed, a real, exhausted, happy laugh. "I don't know, Emeka." For one blessed second, Emeka felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, he thought, finally, a demand nobody can make. Then Chidinma looked down at their crying son, smiled the softest smile Emeka had ever seen on her face, and said gently, "Don't worry, give him time. He'll tell us exactly what he wants." Emeka's face fell in slow motion, because he understood in that exact instant the true horror of what was coming. 9 months of the baby wants it had only been a warm-up, a rehearsal, a gentle introduction to a war that was only just beginning. Because for 9 months, the baby's demand needed a translator, someone to interpret unspoken cravings into suya runs and burnt rice and homemade rainstorms. But now the baby could talk. Not with words yet, no, but with something far more powerful, far more immediate, and far more impossible to ignore. His lungs. And Emeka already knew, with the deep, bone-tired certainty of a man who had spent the last 9 months on more midnight errands than he could count, exactly who would be getting up at 2 a.m. for every cry. Him. He looked down at his son who was still crying, still red-faced, still utterly unimpressed by the world he had just entered, and Emeka let out a long, defeated sigh, followed by a small, helpless laugh. "Welcome to the family," he whispered. "God help me." If you enjoyed this story, the midnight suya runs, the burnt jollof rice, Mama Ogo's perfectly terrible timing, and Emeka's unforgettable rainstorm, do not scroll away without hitting that subscribe button. This channel, African Tales by Raly, brings you a new Nigerian drama and comedy story every single week, straight from the heart of home. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Until next time, stay blessed, stay laughing, and never underestimate what a pregnant woman can convince you to do in the name of "the baby wants it."